Imagine a fortress of stone, a symbol of power, engineered to be unconquerable, towers scraping the sky, walls so thick they could swallow a man whole. For centuries, these magnificent structures dominated the landscape, a testament to human ingenuity and the brutal reality of medieval warfare. They were the ultimate defense. But what if I told you that many of these seemingly impenetrable fortresses shared a single, fatal design flaw? A hidden weakness so critical that once exploited, it could bring the entire castle and its defenders to their knees. It wasn't the height of the walls or the strength of the gate. It was something far more subtle, something hiding in plain sight. And understanding this one flaw changes everything you think you know about castles. For the people living inside a castle, the walls were everything. They were the line between life and death. Behind them, a whole society could function, safe from the chaos of the outside world. Knights, lords, ladies, servants, their entire existence depended on the strength of that stone perimeter, and castle builders knew this. They spent generations perfecting their craft, learning from every siege, every attack. They developed incredible features. The classic image of a castle, the one you probably have in your head right now, is likely a concentric castle. This was the pinnacle of defensive design. Think of it like a stone onion. You have an outer wall, bristling with towers. If an attacker somehow managed to breach that, they weren't inside. No, they were trapped. Trapped in a deadly open space, a killing field, completely exposed to a hail of arrows and stones from the even bigger, even more formidable inner wall. Every part of the design was a death trap. The towers were positioned for perfect overlapping fields of fire. The gateways were fortified with murderous inventions like the portcullis, a giant, spiked iron gate that could be dropped in an instant, and so-called murder holes, openings in the ceiling where defenders could pour boiling oil, drop heavy stones, or fire crossbows down on anyone trapped below. The staircases were even designed to be a nightmare for attackers. They were almost always spiral, and they almost always curved to the right. This forced a right-handed attacker, who would be the vast majority of soldiers, to expose their entire body just to take a swing with their sword. Meanwhile, the defender, coming down the stairs, had their sword arm free and a central pillar for protection. Every single detail was a calculated move in a deadly game of chess. These castles were meant to be siege-proof. They were designed to hold out for months, even years, against a hostile army. So with all this incredible ingenuity, where could such a fatal flaw possibly exist? It wasn't a flaw in the walls. It wasn't a flaw in the towers. It was a flaw in the thinking. It was the very thing that was supposed to keep the defenders alive. It was the latrine. I know what you're thinking. The toilet? The castle toilet is what brought down entire fortresses? It sounds ridiculous. But stick with me, because the reality is stranger and more fascinating than fiction. In a world without modern plumbing, sanitation was a massive engineering challenge. How do you get rid of human waste for hundreds of people day in and day out while you're trapped inside a stone box? The answer was the garterrobe. Garterrobe is a French word, literally meaning to guard a robe, because people would hang their clothes in these shafts, believing the ammonia from the urine would kill fleas and other pests. But functionally, a garterrobe was a stone toilet, a simple seat with a hole that led down a chute straight outside the castle wall. And there's the problem. It was a hole, a direct, unguarded opening through the supposedly impenetrable outer wall of the castle. For an attacker, it was a backdoor. Now, these weren't exactly wide-open invitations. The chutes were often narrow, disgusting, and located high up on the castle wall. But a determined, and let's be honest, very brave attacker could see them for what they were, a vulnerability. One of the most famous examples of this flaw being exploited comes from a castle that was considered one of the strongest in all of Christendom, Château Gaillard. This was Richard the Lionheart's masterpiece. He built it in Normandy in the late 12th century, and he poured everything he knew about military architecture into it. He called it his fair daughter of 1 year, and he boasted that he could hold it even if it were made of butter. It had concentric walls, massive towers, and was perched on a commanding cliff overlooking the River Seine. It was, for all intents and purposes, impregnable. In 1203, the French king Philip II laid siege to this supposedly unbeatable fortress. For months, the English defenders held out. The French army battered the walls, but the castle stood firm. The siege dragged on. The French forces were getting desperate. And then, one soldier, a man by the name of Pierre, noticed something. He saw the garterrobe chute. The toilet shaft. It was a long shot. A disgusting, dangerous, almost suicidal mission. But it was a chance. Under the cover of darkness, this soldier and a small group of his companions made their way to the base of the wall. One by one, they began to climb. Not up the sheer face of the stone, but inside the latrine chute. Imagine that journey for a moment. Clawing your way up a narrow, pitch-black shaft, slick with filth, with the waste of the entire castle garrison above you. The stench must have been unimaginable. The risk of getting stuck, of falling, of being discovered was immense. But they made it. They squirmed their way up the chute and emerged, covered in filth, inside the castle chapel on a lower level. The English defenders were completely stunned. They never, in their wildest nightmares, imagined an attack could come from the toilets. The French soldiers created a diversion, opening a gate from the inside and allowing the main French army to pour into the outer bailey, the area between the walls. Panic and confusion spread among the defenders. The psychological blow was devastating. The one place they thought was safe, the inner sanctum of their fortress, had been breached. From there, the fall of Château Gaillard was swift. The French army pressed their advantage, and the supposedly unconquerable castle fell. Richard the Lionheart's buttery fortress had melted away, all because of a toilet. And this wasn't an isolated incident. The garterrobe was a common weakness. Attackers were constantly looking for any way in. A forgotten postern gate, a poorly guarded section of wall, or a conveniently placed toilet chute. As sieges became more sophisticated, attackers became more creative. They would send in small, nimble soldiers, often boys, to shimmy up these chutes and open a gate from the inside. It was a high-risk, high-reward tactic, but when it worked, it was devastating. Another weakness related to this same kind of thinking was drainage. Castles needed a way to get rid of rainwater and wastewater. This often meant building culverts or drainage pipes that ran under or through the walls. Just like the garterrobe chute, these were a potential entry point. In 1418, during the 100 Years' War, the English were besieging the French city of Rouen. The city was heavily fortified, but the English commander, King Henry V, was a master of siegecraft. His forces discovered a small, grated drainage ditch. It was too small for an armored soldier, but not for someone unarmored and determined. They secretly removed the grate, and a small team of soldiers crawled through the disgusting drain, emerging inside the city walls to launch a surprise attack. This, combined with starvation, eventually forced the city to surrender. Again, a feature designed for sanitation and practicality became the very thing that doomed the defenders. So why did they keep making this mistake? It seems so obvious to us now, with our modern understanding of security. Why would you build a giant, impenetrable wall and then punch a bunch of little holes in it? The truth is, it was a trade-off. For the people living in the castle, sanitation was a constant, pressing problem. Disease could kill a garrison just as effectively as an enemy army. Having a functioning toilet system was a matter of health and hygiene. They had to get the waste out. and the most direct way to do that was a chute through the wall. They likely saw it as a calculated risk. The openings were small, high up, and frankly, so disgusting that they probably assumed no one would be crazy enough to try and climb them. For centuries, they were mostly right. But warfare is an arms race. Every new defense leads to a new method of attack. As attackers became more desperate and more clever, they started looking for these unconventional weaknesses. The flaw wasn't just in the design of the hole itself, but in the mindset of the defenders. They focused on stopping a massive frontal assault. Battering rams, siege towers, catapults. They were prepared for the obvious threats. They weren't prepared for a few filthy soldiers crawling up through their own sewage. It was a failure of imagination. This vulnerability was eventually recognized. In later castle designs, you start to see changes. Garterrobe chutes might be built into a separate external tower, making them harder to access. Or they would empty into a cesspit within the castle walls, rather than directly outside. Grates were added to drainage culverts. Castle builders learned from their mistakes. But for many fortresses, the lesson came too late. The fatal flaw was already built into their very foundations. It's a powerful reminder that even the most impressive feats of engineering can be undone by a single overlooked detail. That strength can create a false sense of security, blinding you to the most unlikely of threats. The story of the garterrobe is the story of how a castle, a symbol of ultimate power and security, could be brought down by its most humble and most disgusting secret. The defenders of Château Gaillard learned that lesson the hard way. They weren't defeated by a superior army or a brilliant new siege engine. They were defeated by a toilet. And by one soldier, brave and desperate enough to see a disgusting necessity as a golden opportunity.